We are now at time, so thank you all for coming. Really appreciate you taking the time on the last afternoon of a 3-day conference, of a long conference, to come and to come to my talk talking about Solarpunk and the web. So I want to give a brief introduction to myself first. My name is Mike Gifford. I am a Canadian. I live in Ottawa, Canada, but I work for an American company called CivicActions. We primarily work with Drupal, not exclusively, but we work a lot with Drupal. And in the Drupal community, I am an accessibility core maintainer. Also, the most active person looking at how to try and to take Drupal and Drupal sustainability and bring that into how to make Drupal more sustainable, because it's like all content management systems, it's a challenge to try and figure out how do we reduce the environmental impact of our processing, both for the server side, but also the client side, thinking about both sides of that equation. I'm also one of the chairs of the WC3 Web Sustainability Guidelines Interest Group. And so this is an effort to say, how do we take the work that's being done on accessibility and bring that over so that we're also thinking about sustainability, the same kind of structure. Because I think that organizations need both carrots and sticks, and we've seen in the accessibility space that sticks can be quite useful. So if you have legislation and enforcement and regulation, like accessibility has been a high priority for some governments for a long time, and yet it is still a challenge to go off and to find accessible websites and to have products that are built to meet the needs of most of the population. So we're a long ways further. We haven't achieved as much as we should have with web accessibility, but I'm hoping that we're going to be able to learn from the experience of web accessibility so that we can more rapidly accelerate around web sustainability and be able to meet some of the or at least reduce the demand that we're putting on the electrical grid and the amount of CO2 and the water consumption that we're causing on our planet. So that's my first sort of who I am and what brings me here. Just before we jump in, how many people here are involved in some way in sustainability? Like, do you have solar on your roof? I don't have solar on my roof. Okay, what about like an electric car? I just have a bicycle, but I got an electric bicycle. What about people who are looking at performance with their software, performance folks? Okay, excellent. And is there anyone else, like any policy people here? No, I didn't think so. Welcome, come and join us. So first of all, I wanted to go off and raise, what is Solarpunk? How many people here know what Solarpunk is? No. Well, then you're in the right place. Oh. That's not good. It does save energy this way. It does save energy, but yeah, because there's, oh wait, there we go, perfect.
Glad to help.
Yeah, amazing. So Solarpunk is a new genre of fiction. This may not be news to you, but we are in a climate crisis. This is not from Blade Runner, and we're not at that stage with Blade Runner, but it certainly, we need to be very seriously thinking about how we think about our planet and how we address how our technological society, how advanced capitalism is threatening our existence, and how do we try and, what is the role that the tech sector plays in that? And I have to apologize also that I decided to play with technology for this, and so all these images are created with AI, so yes, exactly. It is a problem, but I have to just trying to figure out how to go off and tell the story, and this was a useful way to try and do that. So we know about the Paris Agreement, which all states except for the United States are trying to meet at the moment, and I think that's the 2.5 Celsius goal is something that we're probably not going to meet. And that's a real challenge for us as a species. We're already seeing discussions about whether or not the Atlantic, whether the current in the Atlantic is going to change, whether or not there's going to be issues with our weather patterns, whether it's just extreme drought or extreme heat or both. Extreme storms are something that are predicted and we're seen on a regular basis. Yes. Yes.
They are talking about 40 degrees centigrade up in the Nordics.
Right.
In the winter.
Yes.
Plus 40 in the summer for the worst alternatives.
Yeah. No, we've had 10,000 years of climate stability, or at least 1,000 years in terms and we're not ready for the kinds of changes that we're putting on the planet, and it will be significant. There's also a huge element of growth around electrification. Everyone's trying to go off and to think about ways that we can remove the carbon we're adding to the atmosphere by switching to electricity. But at the same time, we're adding more and more. AI is putting additional demands on this as well. When people are thinking about the future, part of the reason that climate change is such a hard sell and why it's been so difficult. I've been working on climate change issues on and off now for 30 years. I was involved in the preparations for UNCED in Brazil in '92. So these are issues that we've known about for a long time, but we've not been able to act on it. And I think part of that is because when people have been talking about the environment, it's always been a matter of less. We will have less. We will have to do more to have less. And that's not an easy sell. We're not packaging the environmental movement in a way that allows us to say, we will have a better life. We will go off and be able to have more of what is valuable to us. Not about more stuff, because more stuff isn't the thing that is valuable to us, but that we will be able to have a better life by means that actually matter to us as humans and to the species around us. But again, we've been pitching about how much there was a report from the UK government a week or two ago saying that because of the water shortages, that people should be deleting their emails and their photos. Again, not a bad idea in general. It's not a bad, but that is not what's going to stop, that's not going to do anything at all of significance to conserve water for the UK. But we're thinking about what individuals can do and how much less they're going to have and how much less options they're going to have. And that's a really hard sell. We need to be having hope. We need to be able to think about this. How many people have read Kim Stanley Robinson's The Ministry of the Future? Okay, that's probably the most popular climate fiction book out there. There's other ones like New York City 2140. This is my effort in this slide to try and replicate that. That's where they have like a super Venice where the climate has risen, or the water has risen so high that the Manhattan is underwater, but they've still got the skyscrapers and whatnot. We need to be able to envision and think about what the future could look like with the climate realities and make this part of the day-to-day story of how we exist. And I think that this is more and more we're going to see that every story is a climate fiction story because this is the reality we're starting to know. And so it should be part of more and more of our films, certainly after the fires in Los Angeles. It'll be something that we will be part of how the stories we tell going forward. Solarpunk is a subgenre of that, but it's sort of like after we've gotten past the climate change crisis, after we've been able to move ourselves off of a fossil fuel-based economy, what does life look like? And this is an interesting space to try and envision what a post-carbon economy might look like and how it could be better than what we have now. Not because we have more stuff or faster cars or like more gadgets or more bigger houses, but because we have more interactions, because we have the ability to tell richer stories, because we have the ability to invest in things that matter, whether that's gardening in our community with our neighbors or whether that's looking to create art or looking to, there's a lot that we can do that does not depend on extracting resources from the planet and selling that for a profit. And so it's an interesting sort of collective effort, and there's some interesting books on that. The one that I recommend mostly is the Monk and the Robot series by Becky Chambers, and she's also written some other books that are looking at hope fiction, because we need hope at this moment. It is so easy to despair. It's so easy to look at this and say, there's so much bad news, especially with how we're presented information. It's so easy to be overwhelmed and say, I don't even know where to begin on how to deal with the waves of change that are going to be thrown to me, and that things I'm going to have to deal with, my family's going to have to deal with, or that they are dealing with. So having hope is critical, because it is through hope that we can take action and we can work collectively to create change. Another book that's quite interesting from a technological point of view is A Half-Built Garden, and it's also got a space theme as part of this as well. So the only hesitation that I have to recommending the Half-Built Garden is that there's an alien sex scene that is part of it, which doesn't work for everyone, but it might work for you. So, or you can skip past it. But anyways, that's the only flag that was like, really, did you have to put that in there? But anyways, it's a good book. We often look at, like, is it a dystopia? And so much of what we're seeing now are like The Handmaid's Tale. That's a dystopian vision. We're seeing that in many ways. We're seeing the ideas of so many of the science fiction stories that we've told ourselves over the last 30 years have been things that we should not be doing. But sadly, some people have taken those as instruction manuals instead of warnings. Utopias are these perfect societies that people like, but there's never been a utopia that's worked out well. Like there's reasons that utopias failed. There's another interesting concept that I recommend people look at, which is called protopia. Solarpunk, you want to come? Excellent. Protopia is basically the idea that our monitors are failing. That we create the future, that we're actively involved in creating the future as a species, and we are. Like, I think that's, especially in the tech sector, we have created so much of our digital realities today, and that digital reality is informing everything. Like, democracy has to change based on what we're doing. Like, we are future makers, and we don't necessarily talk about ourselves that way, but that is a reality, and I think that we have not necessarily taken the responsibility that comes with being future makers. But protopia is a sort of again an approach to try and think about the future and your role in creating the future that you want to live in. And we all have a space to go off and to create that future. So again, it depends on people like you and me to get involved and to actually do the things. But so how does this relate to the web? Because I'm largely focused on the web. I'm trying to broaden this out so it's not just looking at the web. And I want to just note that as far as things like accessibility, accessibility is defining how to define accessible technology. And some things will convert to other devices and some things will not. But the web is the default interface for so much technology right now. And that may change. It may be that we're going to an API first everything, but I don't think we're ever going to get away from having some need to have a semantic user interface that is like HTML on the web. So I'm going to be focusing on the web partly because it has the ability to influence other technologies and because it's a dominant part of, it's what I know. So yeah, we create the future. The web is a primary interface. I think we also don't take enough credit for the fact that open source has already won. We don't talk about it like this. We still see ourselves as being the underdogs. Again, the investment and the energy still comes from the big technology and whether it's the Microsofts or the Googles, and yes, that they have a hell of a lot of power in the space. But when Black Duck reported that 90% of all software uses open source, that means that essentially, and you look at how many people using GitHub are aware of open source. I mean, they're not even really, like, it's not really even a discussion in some ways, because this is just the water that new developers are breathing, and the air that they're breathing is there, sorry, not the water they're breathing, the air that they're breathing when they're learning technology. It's they're not even necessarily even aware of it being, of the difference of what it was, and of being involved in the open source community or the free software community since early 90s. So I've had long-standing debates from when it was very different, when there wasn't this wasn't, when these ideas were still being formed in many ways. But we have a lot of influence as a community to say we can make change on a broader level, since everyone is using our technology, pretty much. And if we can contribute back in ways that support our collective future, we're going to make not only our projects better, but everyone's lives better. Right now, we are creating a dystopia. The Web, I'm involved in the Web Almanac, and I've done the, is everyone here familiar with the Web Almanac? It's like a semi-annual snapshot of where the web is today, or for the year prior. And so we scan 17 million websites and use Google Lighthouse and other tools to try and look at performance and look at page weight and provide senses of, like, how large are the font files that are involved, how large is the CSS involved, how much bloat is there in the web. And the average web page today is larger than the initial download of the video game Doom, which is kind of shocking, since that was a multi-party game. Like how much does the web need to be as big as it is for what we're delivering? Or are we just getting used to throwing JavaScript here or there? Are we using giant images and PDFs just because, well, it's what the customers want, like whatever? And as the web has moved to using JavaScript and adopting JavaScript, we're offloading a lot of the carbon intensity of that to the client side. And the challenge with that is that you have the servers are really optimized for performance, because servers, like, energy is a big amount of the cost that they're associated with. But if you're developing a web page that pushes things into JavaScript to the client, well, the client's their interface isn't going to be optimized for. I'm not sure where that's failing, if that's on my end with my little dongle, or if that's with the website, or with the, there we go. But our approaches to technology have made things more complicated and have pushed the responsibility for processing onto a processor which is not optimized for delivery. So it's there's a greater environmental impact by having things being done in JavaScript on the client side versus on the server side. We just don't account for the cost. It's an externality as far as the website producer is involved. From a user perspective, I want to just highlight that slow sites are something that really do limit UX, and that it's a real challenge for UX. We lose trust by not having responsive websites, and that's particularly a challenge for government. And we need government in order to be able to run a modern society. And so we have to have trust in government and have systems that citizens can rely on. But governments have notoriously slow and ineffective websites. And so that's something that we need to start dealing with. There's also just the energy cost in building software. There's always fascinating in the web sustainability communities that I'm part of, where people will be like, oh yeah, Drupal's enormous, it's a terrible CMS because it's just too big and too cumbersome. And it's like, well, you can build your own little optimized application that's built with Rust or whatever, and that's great, but there's the energy that's involved in creating that software, reinventing the wheel, trying to go off and to take all of the mistakes and the learnings that have been implemented by hundreds of thousands of people who've tried and implemented and experimented with the existing web stacks. Looking at the communities that have existed and that have flourished by working together and learning how to work together. And if you just look at the technology aside from the community, I think that we can get we can come to conclusions that are not great when you're looking at the entire energy cost of a system, because coming to events like this are really important in terms of building community, of learning with each other, of taking ideas that work well in one instance and trying to apply them to another space. And we need to be building building more discussions and more communities so that we can work together in order to have those small modular components that are designed to be robust and optimized and maintained going forward. Because again, if you just maintaining the security of an application is not a minor undertaking, and we need to be thinking about how we go and are maintaining these projects going ahead so that they can be securely maintained and are not being hacked for some Bitcoin operations going ahead, which has happened in many times. There have been websites that have been hacked and used for all kinds of nefarious purposes, which has a bad carbon implications. Like if your server is being hacked, that is a problem. Performance is often overlooked when we're trying to build out technology. It is something that clients regularly they forget to ask for, or they're more interested in the features than they are the performance. And we were talking earlier about the environmental or the accessibility implications of having slow websites, of having if people who use older devices or have less internet access are not able to go off and to use your technology, that is an accessibility issue as well as a sustainability issue. How many people here regularly go through and delete their files or their clean up, do a spring cleaning on their hard drive? Because we've got 4 people in this room that regularly go do spring cleaning on their devices and whatnot, so that they're getting rid of the useless stuff that they do. But that should be normal. Everyone should be doing that. Why isn't I should be doing that? I don't. But it's something that we should internalize as a technology community. That it's not just about buying a faster device or more RAM or more an additional hard drive, but at some point we have to delete the thousands of pictures that we have that we're not using or that are not good or that are we need to be able to delete things, and we're not good at that. We've been told, especially with AI, that the long tail is where it's at, and that you can just keep that there's valuable information in there. So don't throw away any piece of data, because that piece of data, when you throw an AI engine at it, there might be some gold in there somewhere that you'll find user behavior or something, right? This is what we've been told from big data people moving ahead. Okay, so.
Actively deleting data, doesn't that put more energy consumption into stuff than just keeping the bits as they are on the storage that you're not looking at? I mean, in the other case where you then feed all of the data to AI, okay, there's an energy cost with that.
I think it depends on how it's done. And it depends on what data you're keeping, and I think we should know how we're I don't know this. I haven't got studies on that. So, do you have got data on this?
So eventually, the data will need to be complete. If you have SSD and it knows that the data there, from time to time it will need to complete somewhere else. So you are better at deleting it.
Even just trying to go off and put it into cold storage somewhere, even if you're trying to think about how you deal with it from your solid state drive to somewhere else, because you've run out of memory on your devices. We're not good at managing even just our log files, right?
Kind of get when you're running out of space.
Yeah, but even before, but not beforehand. But if you've got dealing with the cloud, there is no limit to space, right? It's just just keep going. Why ever delete something?
The main aspect is the brain. You need to produce the hard drives. The more you have, and if you ever move it, and you at some point the hard drive will break, so you need a new one to bigger, and the production of that will probably be the main aspect.
Yeah.
So you would need to specify what hardware we are talking about. For hard drive, there will be very small cost in deleting it. For SSD, you are better at deleting it.
And we should be having these conversations in our communities so that we can be able to say, well, what is the best practice for this kind of data, for this kind of situation? So we know that, but this is not the time for that, because I have to talk about the web sustainability guidelines first. So in terms of trying to go off and create those incentives for change, I've looked at accessibility and what accessibility has done, and there's carrots and sticks. Carrots come in terms of procurement, that in the US at least there was an effort to go off and to prioritize accessibility, and buying accessible products and services were something that were supposed to give a competitive advantage. And so companies like Amazon and Adobe spent a whole lot creating these accessibility conformance reports that demonstrated that they were the most accessible option out there. And that was useful for creating some movement on accessibility. There's also sticks, and here in Europe, there's the European Accessibility Act, which came into effect in June. Hopefully that comes with some sticks where people start to be afraid about the fines that are being advertised in each nation state to be able to force financially encourage companies to go off and start implementing accessibility in their product builds. But for sustainability, you need to have, or for accessibility, that required a standard that people could implement and build against. And that's essentially WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or as it's implemented in Europe, the EN 301549 standard, which is updated every couple of years. But we need something like that for sustainability. How many of you are involved in the WC3 at all? Okay, it's an interesting sausage-making process, like any standards body. Any other standards bodies that people are involved in? IEEE, IETF, they all have sustainability sort of pieces to them. So for the web, the WC3 is recognized as the authority, and creating a process with the WC3 is an interesting and time-consuming process. The web is evolving, and so the standards are going to need to evolve going ahead as well. But we've created an interest group that has, and I'll be making these slides available afterwards so that you can click on those red things, which are links. And I can definitely tweet about them as well. But there are, the community group has a set of guidelines. It has a web page with a charter. There's some GitHub pages that have information that's there. This is still an evolving draft. We don't have something that's a finalized version yet. But it is important that we both get people talking about it, but also that we get organizations involved. So how do we try and get corporations, whether it's Google or Microsoft or others that are members of the WC3, and organizations like governments who are caring about sustainability and want to be able to find some mechanism to go off and to encourage demand-side management so that there is less electricity consumption in their country because websites are taking less energy to load, and finding ways to build that in. So we're definitely looking to try and build that out, and we need input from people to go off and say this is a standard that's robust and has international consensus on as a version 1 of what we can see as a best practice moving ahead. So I would encourage you to take a look at the issue queues in those and to get involved if you have any questions and to read the standards in full. I'm not going to go through and highlight each one of the issues, or all of the success criteria that we're evaluating. Right now, we've tried to break them down by the type of experience or type of issue that we have, and they're broken down by the user experience, by web development, by the looking at infrastructure and design systems, looking at business and strategy. These are probably going to change into some other structure when we revise the format, but we wanted to say that this is something that affects everyone. This is not just something that is a sysadmin's responsibility, but it is a sysadmin's responsibility. It's not just something that is a UX issue or a visual design issue, but it's very much something that every digital role has some responsibility for how they implement digital sustainability and how they should be conscious of how they can use less energy in the process of what they do when they're creating digital products and services. So on open source, we've got a few organizations that are, I think, are leading the charge on this. So from the web, there's the Green Web Foundation. They're doing some amazing stuff. The Green Software Foundation is also an amazing organization, and they've done some neat work looking at things like how do you evaluate the carbon of your carbon emissions from your Kubernetes instance? How do you track that? so that you have a mechanism to do that, so you can have more measurement around what your actual carbon figures are when you're dealing with that. There's also a Slack community that's quite interesting. That's the Climate Action Tech Slack community, and there's interesting groups of people that are part of that community as well. Because this is a Linux Foundation event, I just have to go off and highlight the LF Energy community, which is a vertical that the Linux Foundation is looking at to say, how do we try and focus on energy consumption, develop smart grids. That's another part of this in terms of sustainability and open source. There's also, like I mentioned, the IEEE and IETF earlier. They definitely have sustainability tracks as well. Has anyone, well, how many people here have been to FOSDEM? Okay, there's an energy track there. Really interesting stuff that's, I mean, I don't know if it'll be there this next year, but the last 3 years, there's been an energy track that has had some fascinating talks on a range of different topics. So again, these are interesting spaces to get involved, people who are looking at similar issues and ways to find people who are experimenting with the same kinds of challenges that we are. And I know there were some people here who were talking about solar and trying to look at their house and managing their house and how they've sort of set up their infrastructure on their house. There was a guy from Mozilla who gave an interesting presentation last year or the year before on that. So there's a lot of resources that are like all the other FOSDEM resources available on through the web. You can still watch the talks that have happened historically at FOSDEM for free. So definitely encourage that people do that. Also, I have to say that there's do people know Drupal's founder Dries Buytaert? So Dries has if you go to he has solar.dri.es. That's his domain name. He's got a little Arduino website that's set up and running off of solar, off a house that he has. So he's got a little solar implementation that's delivering this, and like this kind of experimentation of like how do you build a web presence that is independent from the electrical grid and allows you to build something on solar on demand. I mean, it's an interesting experiment. It's not something that you're going to see running a large production website anytime soon, but it is interesting to see like how do you optimize for that kind of performance? How do you try and find something that is able to leverage solar energy as effectively as possible? I think it's worth looking at when people are like the people look at bandwidth. That's one of the challenges we have with web sustainability, or with web sustainability, is that we look at bandwidth as being like how big are the images, how much JavaScript, how big is the web page? Like there's a default to using size as an analogy for how much CO2 is being consumed, and there's reasons to do that because it's hard to get an exact number. Metrics is difficult, but it's also just important to note that the network is highly optimized, and that the network is not the biggest source of CO2 on any website. That it's maybe with Netflix, but with most websites it's something that if you're sending packages back and forth, the network is a small portion of the electricity that's being consumed. In general, we're looking at fewer cycles. So whatever you're doing, like especially with open source software, we can think about our application and how slow is our application right now. But if your tool is being used in millions or billions of places, then if you even make a very, very small reduction in the size of the code, if it speeds it up a really small proportion, but it's being used trillions of times a day, which some of our software is, that's something that can actually start to have a significant impact, even if it doesn't on a testing perspective. Like we're looking at it in a small, like because its use is scaled up so much, it's something that we need to be thinking about that way. Are people familiar at all with the energy emissions, Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3 greenhouse gas emissions? So there's a way of trying to go off and evaluate CO2 and what is the CO2 produced from a device or some process. And the analogy is essentially scope one is if you're putting your kettle on a fire that has you're burning something directly that's heating up something that you want. Like that's a scope one emission that you can track because you can track how much wood you're burning. Scope two is if you can look at if you're using an electric kettle and you're charging you can say how much electricity does it cost or how much does it take to go off and to boil the kettle, because there's no CO2 from you plugging in your kettle into the wall directly. Like there's nothing measurable from your house, but it's being used somewhere. It's coming from somewhere, and if it's not coming from solar, then there's CO2 somewhere down the line that needs to be evaluated. So it's that. And the scope three is both all of the processes that go into producing your product as well as using your product. So it's basically everything else. So it's a broad swath, and scope three emissions are often overlooked when looking at digital technologies, and that's where the biggest environmental impact is in those scope three technologies. And yeah, prioritizing these can be quite difficult, trying to figure out where do you want to start? What is the biggest impact you can make right now? The main thing I can tell you as far as that is like start early. Like the earlier, like it's like the story, like the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time is now. It's the same concept. Renewable energy, also really important. So how do we look at prioritizing the use of renewable energy? How do we put that into our contracts so that when we're looking at getting where our servers are being powered by, that they're managed by 24/7 renewable energy? How do we look at reducing e-waste? Again, we've got all these devices, and what happens when they die, right? Whether we don't have any good mechanisms for people to go off and to reuse and recycle that technology. Yep. There's definitely post-market opportunities, and there's
There's projects called post-marketos, and you relate the device to them.
right. But even there, there's how do you recycle them at the end of the day? How do you try and make sure that they're not just going to a giant dump somewhere where they're being processed by people in where the rare materials are being processed by people in India? It's a challenge. I've already talked about green shifting, which is just moving the processing around based on where it's being implemented. So where's the greenest place for you to have this processing take place? Can you move it to Finland? Do they have greener electricity than where you are in Germany? Whatever, that sort of thing. Embedded technology is another piece I wanted to talk about briefly. That it does take energy, and there's a carbon output for just producing our devices. So the longer we can extend the lifespan of our devices, the better it is, the lower the CO2 is. And again, that's a hard thing to classify, and it's a hard thing to manage because it's, again, third-party kinds of issues. But there's a lot that we can do in designing websites to make older devices last longer. And AI, I had to talk a little bit about AI. It is a real problem. I think there are opportunities to go off and use AI to accelerate adoption of some of these issues, to accelerate testing, to be able to use AI in order to reduce the overall cost of using technology, but it has to be something that is used constructively and then thoughtfully, and not something that's just willy-nilly applied to every Google search that you do. We're seeing the demand for data centers being a real huge challenge, not just for the grid and the price of electricity, but also just for the availability of water. This is something that is right now having impacts on communities in the U.S. and in other places. But there's an opportunity to use AI right now to try and reduce the consumption and find ways to be more performant. And that's all I got.